Now we think to 200 kilos, which would actually be around 450 pounds. And this is half butter. We can go out on simple glass here, the line one. This is here, they
With a GDP at purchasing power per capita of roughly $28,250, New Zealand ranked 5th in the 2011 Human Development Index and 4th in the 2011 Index of Economic Freedom published by the Heritage Foundation. The country is heavily dependent on international trade, particularly in agricultural products. Wool was once New Zealand's major export, but nowadays dairy farming is increasing in importance. Other top agricultural exports include meat, fruit, fish and wine, while the main markets are Australia, United States, Japan, China and the United Kingdom. Now, exports of these products are a major component of the New Zealand economy. Am I right? The country relies a lot on exporting the product. Indonesia, we import, the meat and the dairy products and so on. Now, with the recent global crisis, how is New Zealand doing financially? Has it been much affected by the financial crisis at all, and probably reduction of imports from these countries?
Yeah, I mean, initially difficult, like everyone with the global financial crisis. So when we came into office in the latter part of 2008, we had been in recession for about 6 months, driven off a sort of a housing bubble that the Reserve Bank were keen to suppress. And so we had quite a choppy and difficult time for the first 12 months we were in office. The global financial crisis and the local issues didn't help us. But we started growing. We've actually grown in, I think, 9 of the last 10 quarters, so it's been reasonably strong growth. We've also had the earthquake which took place in Christchurch, and that had quite a big economic impact initially. I suppose ironically later on in the next few years that will have a big stimulatory effect as we rebuild what's our second largest city. But there's no doubt that without the impact of Asia, New Zealand would have had a much deeper recession, because historically where our big markets were the US, to a lesser degree Australia, but because they weren't really so affected by the crisis, but the UK and Europe, we would have had a much weaker economy. But Asia really picked up where the demand was reduced from the US and Europe, so that helped us a lot.
And you're very well positioned as a country with recessions in the US and in Europe with reduced demands. And you mentioned about trading with China. So who are your, other than China, your main trading partners at the moment?
So Australia probably for a long time will be #1. The United States used to be #2, but now it's China. And just the economic wealth effect we see right across Asia, not just China. I mean, obviously, Indonesia, Malaysia, many countries, Singapore, Hong Kong, India, all very successful nations and becoming much wealthier. And so we see demand for services and goods, and we see the building of long-term relationships with those countries. I mean, we've already had very strong and warm ties with them, but our people-to-people contacts really help us sort of grow those relationships.
So are you optimistic about the economic projections for New Zealand?
I am, yeah. I mean, because the Christchurch rebuild will be very stimulatory. Secondly, we think the world's come through the worst of the crisis. So Europe is still struggling, and I think they will actually for quite some time. There's a lot of debt in those countries, and there's quite a lot of rigidity in their economic framework. I think the United States will actually start doing a bit better. We're starting to see some more positive numbers there. And, look, overall, I think the worst is behind us now.
But Asia is sort of the rising star at the moment, isn't it?
And will be for a long time.
Recently, the film industry is also making up a significant contribution to New Zealand's economy through blockbuster epics such as the Lord of the Rings trilogy and The Hobbits. Here in Wellington, the city is becoming the country's film capital, churning 35 feature films in 2011 and helping bring around $3 billion in revenue for the year. The films are also effective marketing tools to attract visitors and spawn many job opportunities.
But you can see afterwards, they roll off the hill here. If you look at this carefully, you can see that this tree, and this tree is the half tree, that tree and that tree. So this is where the hobbits come tumbling off the hill.
Especially given there's such a small population New Zealand has, I suppose, looking out, finding expanding the market is vital to the economy. But I also noticed that, for example, there's lots of films now being shot in New Zealand, you know, Lord of the Rings and
Hobbits in
the
recent
Hobbits.
times.
Yes. How is that, you know, growing? Is that bringing in a significant amount of income for New Zealand?
It is. I mean, something like the Hobbit movies, a better part of $1 billion will be spent on those movies. And as you may not know, James Cameron, who's the producer of Avatar and Titanic and others, has just we've just granted him an application to become, you know, to come and live in New Zealand. So he's bought a big farm here. So there's every chance he's going to make a number of successful movies, hopefully, you know, in New Zealand. And I mean, overall, it's an industry based on, I think, what New Zealand does well, which is we pick a segment of the market that we think that we can be really good at. It's usually at the quality end of the market. And so in the case of Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits, it's really based around the brilliance of Peter Jackson and Richard Taylor and the digital technology they bring. But the big employers, I mean, 3,000 people working on the Hobbit movies alone. In the United States, more people know New Zealand for the Lord of the Rings than they know us for the All Blacks. Middle Earth, yeah. You can come visit Middle Earth. I've been to Hobbiton. You can come if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you know, it brings New Zealand to the world, which means that a lot of tourists, I would imagine, come to New Zealand. Now, how important is the tourism industry, and has it sort of picked up because of these? You know, big screen exposure to the country? Yeah,
I think so. I mean, it's all marketing, and it's worldwide marketing. If you look at something like The Hobbits, I mean, Peter Jackson writes on his Facebook site every couple of weeks. He shows a little behind-the-scenes making of The Hobbits. He gets a huge number of hits. I think he gets more hits on that than the New York Times gets online. So he's doing a lot to market New Zealand. And look, I mean, the raw beauty and the fact that it's a one-stop flight for people from Asia means it's very accessible. It's different. It's friendly, so people don't feel at risk when they're here or intimidated. They get a different experience. It's small enough to sort of navigate around, so you can get to see 3 or 4 different things in a relatively short period of time. And tourism's really important to us. It's about 10% of our overall employment base, if you look at, you know, the kind of wider definition. And in fact, I'm the Minister of Tourism, so every Prime Minister takes a portfolio they think is important, typically in New Zealand outside of running the government, and I took tourism as a reflection of the fact that I thought that was really critical to our future.